apartment if you're in there. Okay. All right. I'm going back out of the apartment. Are you in the hallway now? I'm trying to get there. I don't know. No, I think so.
After hearing shots fired, the entire department descended on the scene. The home of 66-year-old Thomas Wayne Waddell. Now, there aren't enough words to describe how beloved Tom was. He had recently retired from Kroger, where he was a manager, the kind of manager that stuck up for his employees and treated everyone with kindness. He loved woodworking, nature, Christmas decorating, church, and most of all, his grandkids. But there was someone else he loved too. 36-year-old Deborah Frazier, his live-in but on-again, off-again girlfriend. And when police arrived, they found her bleeding on the floor of the apartment from a gunshot wound to the leg. She was quickly raced to the hospital, leaving officers to inspect the scene and file for break-in. Only, nothing indicated there was a break-in. Everything they saw indicated that Deborah's fall was a cover-up for another crime. And when they went into the back bedroom, they discovered what? Inside, they found the body of Tom. He'd been shot, wrapped in a blanket, trash bags, and duct tape. With a clear homicide and no signs of a break-in or robbery like Deborah claimed, police instantly suspected who was behind his death. And she was sitting in a hospital room, playing the victim card.
Take your chances. How much money? Sure.
The following footage was provided to us by the Zanesville Police Department.
So it's Deborah Frazier, right? Alright. So like I said, before we talk to you about anything, since you're what I do is when I talk to people, I ask them their very just make sure they understand what they're doing. I don't know if you want to pull your trailer or tell me when you get in. Wait, you don't have to do. Where are you actually injured at? I didn't. Your left leg or right? I know we tried to get some information out of you yesterday about, but everything was so hectic with what was going on. We get you to the hospital to make sure that you didn't suffer any significant injuries.
Sure, Deborah took a gunshot wound to the thigh, but something tells me that the shot she's about to take to her ego is going to hurt a lot worse. The detectives read her rights and dive into the supposedly harrowing incident that she experienced.
Alright. Just so, what's going on? What happened yesterday? And this, I don't want to put words into your mouth or anything, so this is just in your own words. That's why we record everything. That way we don't miss anything. We can get the best accurate description of what happened. So, the day before yesterday, Wednesday. Okay.
we are not the exception? What if we are the pattern? Everything we have covered so far points in one direction. A carbon event with an organic fingerprint and an unexplained volume gap. A formal scientific model proving we cannot distinguish that event from industrial output at geological timescales. 7 years of institutional silence after the question was formally published, and a chemical match between the PETM signal and what we are producing right now. But here is the piece that makes all of it worse. We assumed throughout this that the problem is finding evidence of something that came before us. We have been asking whether the geological record could show us a previous civilization. That is the wrong question. The right question is whether the geological record could show us a previous civilization, even in principle. And the answer Frank and Schmidt gave us is no. Think about what that actually means. We are not dealing with a situation where the evidence exists, and we have not found it yet. We are dealing with a situation where the evidence, by the laws of geological time, cannot exist in a form we would recognize. The signal survives. The story behind the signal does not. We would find the fingerprint and call it a natural event. We would publish a paper with an open gap in the explanation. We would note the anomaly and move on, which is exactly what we did with the PETM 30 years ago, and have been doing ever since. Here is the darkest version of this. We are not looking for something we have not found. We may have already found it, named it, studied it extensively, and filed it under natural causes because we did not build the framework to recognize it for what it was until 2018. And even after we built that framework, we did not go back and apply it seriously. We found the answer. We just did not recognize it as one. What does it mean when absence of evidence is not evidence? In most situations, that phrase is a logical caveat, a way of saying we should not draw conclusions from incomplete data. But in this specific case, it is not a caveat. It is a physical law. The geological record does not preserve civilizations. It preserves chemistry. Those are different things. Confusing them has consequences. Here is what we actually know from the geological record about the deep past. We know what chemicals were in the atmosphere. We know what the global temperature was. We know which species existed and which went extinct. We know the volume and isotopic composition of major carbon events. What we cannot know from the geological record alone is whether any of those events had an intelligent cause. The record is not built to carry that information. It was never going to carry that information. 50 million years of geological processing removes the signal that would tell you the difference. So when scientists say there is no evidence of a previous civilization, they are saying something technically accurate that is also deeply misleading. There is no evidence we can currently interpret as a previous civilization. That is not the same thing. The first statement implies the record is clean. The second statement acknowledges the record is blind in a specific and relevant way. We built entire fields of science on the assumption that absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Astrobiology, CT, origin of life research, all of them operate on the implicit assumption that if something significant happened, we would be able to find the trace of it. And Schmidt showed that assumption is wrong, at least for civilizations, at least at geological timescales, and nobody in those fields has seriously updated their framework in response. Here is my position on that. We do not know that something was here before us. We also cannot know that something was not. Those two positions are not symmetric. One of them is comfortable. One of them requires changing how we think about our place in Earth's history. And we have, collectively, chosen the comfortable one without doing the work to justify it. The PETM fingerprint is in the rock. The gap in the explanation is in the literature. And the framework that connects them has been sitting in a peer-reviewed journal since 2018 with almost nobody looking directly at it. What are we waiting for? What do you build when you have just watched the world end? 12,800 years ago, something ended a world. Not metaphorically, physically. In a window that geology measures in decades, the climate of the entire northern hemisphere shifted. Temperatures dropped sharply. Vast ecosystems that had been stable for tens of thousands of years collapsed. A culture that had spread across an entire continent disappeared so completely that for decades we did not know it existed. Gone. And right in the middle of that collapse, within a few generations, somebody started building the most sophisticated structure on Earth. Not a shelter, not a defensive wall. A complex of massive carved stone pillars, arranged with astronomical precision, decorated with images that researchers are still working to fully decode. At a site called Göbekli Tepe in what is now southeastern Turkey. Dated to roughly 11,500 years before the current era. 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. Here is what the standard timeline says about the people who built it. They were hunter-gatherers. No writing, no agriculture, no state, no organized labor force. By every textbook definition of the word, they were not supposed to be capable of this. And here is my position on that. When the physical evidence contradicts the textbook, the correct response is to question the textbook, not to explain away the evidence. Göbekli Tepe exists. The dating is solid. The complexity is not in dispute. What is in dispute is how people at that stage of development built it. And the answer that nobody wants to say out loud is that they were not at that stage of development. They knew things we have not accounted for. Things they learned, or inherited, or preserved from something that came before the catastrophe. The fingerprint is not just in the rock, it is in the stone. What were they trying to remember? How do you prove something hit the earth 12,800 years ago? Same way you prove anything in geology. You read what the event left behind. And in this case, what it left behind is specific, measurable, and sitting in locations that have no other explanation. Nanodiamonds, tiny crystals of carbon that form only under extreme pressure and temperature. The kind produced by a high-velocity cosmic impact. The cosmic impact. You cannot make nanodiamonds with a volcanic eruption. You cannot make them with a flood or a storm or a climate shift. There is a very short list of processes that produce them at this scale. The list has one item on it. They were found at over 50 separate sites across 4 continents: North America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, all in the same stratigraphic layer, all dated to the same narrow window around 12,800 years ago. Not approximately the same window, the same layer. The kind of synchronicity that in geology means one event, not several. Along with the nanodiamonds, researchers found magnetic microspherules, tiny spheres of metal that form when rock melts rapidly and cools in air. Iridium, rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. Shocked quartz, grains deformed by pressures far beyond anything geological processes produce. All in the same layer, all at the same time, all over the planet. The meltwater hypothesis explains the cooling. It does not explain the nanodiamonds. It does not explain the iridium. It does not explain synchronized continental fires recorded in the same layer across 3 continents. 2 explanations exist for the Younger Dryas. One covers the cooling. One covers the entire list of physical evidence. We chose the one that covers less. Why does the explanation that accounts for more evidence get treated as the fringe position? In 2018, the same year Frank and Schmidt published the Silurian hypothesis, a different team announced something else entirely. Under 900 meters of Greenland ice, they had found a crater, 31 kilometers across, hidden under the ice sheet for so long that nobody knew it was there until radar mapping technology became sensitive enough to see through the ice. A hole in the bedrock large enough to fit a major city inside with room to spare. The initial dating placed the impact at roughly 12,800 years ago. Think about what that means physically. A rock large enough to carve a 31-kilometer crater hit the northern ice sheet at the exact moment the world was ending. The impact would have instantly vaporized billions of tons of ice. That water and debris would have entered the atmosphere within hours. The shockwave would have crossed the continent. The heat pulse would have ignited fires across a vast radius. The material thrown into the atmosphere by the force of the collision would have spread globally within days. Now look at the evidence layer again. Nanodiamonds, iridium, magnetic microspherules, synchronized continental fires, all in the same layer, all consistent with exactly what a high-velocity impact into a northern ice sheet would produce and distribute globally. The dating of the Hiawatha crater was later revised by some researchers. The debate on precise timing is ongoing and legitimate, but here is what that debate does not change. The crater exists. An impact of that scale in that region was physically possible, and the evidence layer from 12,800 years ago looks exactly like what that kind of event leaves behind. We have the hole in the ground, we have the chemistry in the rock, we have the physical markers distributed globally at the same moment. What exactly is missing before we take this seriously? What happened to the Clovis people? They were the first humans in North America, spread across an entire continent over thousands of years. Sophisticated hunters with precision tools found at sites from Canada to the tip of South America. Not a struggling population, a thriving one. And then, within one human generation, their distinctive tools stop appearing in the archaeological record entirely. Not a gradual decline, not a slow migration. One layer they are there, the next layer they are not. The standard explanation is overhunting combined with climate stress. Human hunters drove the megafauna to extinction. The food web collapsed. The culture disappeared. That is a coherent story. It works on paper, and it has one specific problem. Overhunting is gradual. It takes generations. It leaves a trail in the record of declining populations, shifting strategies, cultural adaptation. The Clovis disappearance does not look gradual. It aligns, within the resolution of available dating methods, with the impact evidence layer, with the nanodiamonds, with the iridium, with the synchronized fires. One memory, one moment. Everything changes at once. Here is my position. Science prefers the simpler explanation. That preference is usually correct, and it is a reasonable default. But simple and correct are not the same thing. And when the simpler explanation cannot account for the physical evidence in the rock, it stops being science and starts being comfort. The people who built the most sophisticated tools in the Western Hemisphere at that time vanished in a generation. At the exact moment, the sky was apparently doing something catastrophic. And the mainstream account of their disappearance does not include what the rock says happened above their heads. Why are we more comfortable with a story that fits our prior assumptions than with the one that fits the evidence? Here's the number that breaks the overhunting explanation completely. Not one continent. 4. In the same narrow window around 12,800 years ago, North American megafauna went extinct. Mammoths, mastodons, horses, camels, giant ground sloths. At the same time, woolly mammoths in Eurasia declined sharply. Large fauna in Australia showed disruption in the same window. The same pattern repeating across ecosystems with no contact between them. No shared human population. No shared climate event severe enough on its own to explain simultaneous collapse across the entire northern hemisphere. Gone. All of them. At the same time, hunting pressure is local. A human population in North America driving mammoths to extinction has no mechanism for simultaneously affecting woolly mammoths in Siberia. These populations were not in contact. They were not coordinating. Whatever reached them all at roughly the same moment was not a hunting